The problem with doing these YouTube lives now is that they give you an option to make a picture at the beginning for what's the thumbnail, and now I'm getting obsessed with how I look on that, whereas before it just picks some random clip for me. Anyway, back in Boswell, if you'll recall, a bunch of men I don't think there's any women this time, are sitting around talking, as usual. We talked of living in the country. Johnson said, "No wise man will go to live in the country unless he has something to do which can be better done in the country. For instance, if he is to shut himself up for a year to study a science, it is better to look out to the fields than to an opposite wall. Then, if a man walks out in the country, there is nobody to keep him from walking in again. But if a man walks out in London, he is not sure when he shall walk in again. A great city is, to be sure, the school for studying life, and the proper study of mankind is man, as Pope observes." I said, "I fancy London is the best place in the world for society, though I have heard that the very first society of Paris is still beyond anything that we have here." Johnson said, "Sir, I question if in Paris such a company as is sitting round this table could be got together in less than half a year. They talk in France of the felicity of men and women living together. The truth is that the men are not higher than the women. They know no more than the women do, and they are not held down in their conversation by the presence of women." Little sexist to Johnson is sometimes. Ramsay said, "Literature is upon the growth. It is in its spring in France. Here it is rather passé." Johnson said, "Literature was in France long before we had it. Paris was the second city for the revival of letters. Italy had it first, to be sure. What have we done for literature, equal to what was done by the Stephanie and others in France? Our literature came to us through France. Caxton printed only 2 books, Chaucer and Gower, that were not translations from the French, and Chaucerino took much from the Italians. No, sir, if literature will be in the spring in France, it is a second spring. It is after a winter. We are now before the French in literature, but we had it long after them. In England, any man who wears a sword and a powdered wig is ashamed to be illiterate. I believe it is not so in France, yet there is probably a great deal of learning in France, because they have such a number of religious establishments. So many men who have nothing else to do but to study. I do not know this, but I take it upon the common principles of chance. Where there are many shooters, some will hit." We talked of old age. Johnson, now in his 70th year, said, "It is a man's own fault. It is from want of use, if his mind grows torpid in old age." The bishop asked if an old man does not lose faster than he gets. Johnson said, "I think not, my lord, if he exerts himself." One of the company, says here R.O. Cambridge in a later footnote, rashly observed that he thought it was happy for an old man that insensibility comes upon him. Johnson, with a noble elevation and disdain, said, "No, sir, I should never be happy by being less rational." The Bishop of St. Asaph said, "You wish then, sir, is some Greek letters." And Johnson said, "Yes, my lord." So the Greek letters are, "I grow in learning as I grow in years." It's from Solon, Plutarch. Okay. His lordship mentioned a charitable establishment in Wales where people were maintained and supplied with everything upon the condition of their contributing the weekly produce of their labor. And he said they grew quite torpid for want of property. Johnson said, "They have no object for hope. Their condition cannot be better. It is rowing without a port." One of the company, says here R.O. Cambridge again, I don't know why he's anonymous here, asked him the meaning of the expression in Juvenal, "Unius Lacerte." Johnson said, I think it clear enough, as much ground as one may have a chance to find a lizard upon. Okay. Commenters have differed as to the exact meaning of the expression by which the poet intended to enforce the sentiment contained in the passage where these words occur. It is enough that they mean to denote even a very small possession, provided it be a man's own. Est aliquid conque loco conque recesso unius sese dominum fecisse lacerte. 'Tis somewhat to be lord of some small ground in which a lizard may at least turn round. From Juvenal. That's a good quote. This season there was a whimsical fashion in the newspapers of applying Shakespeare's words to describe living persons well known in the world, which was done under the title of Modern Characters from Shakespeare, many of which were admirably adapted. The fancy took so much that they were afterwards collected into a pamphlet. Somebody, footnote tells us this is not yet identified, said to Johnson across the table that he had not been in those characters. Yes, said Johnson, I have. I should have been sorry to be left out. He then repeated what had been applied to him. I must borrow Gargantua's mouth, from As You Like It, Act 3, Scene 2. Miss Reynolds, not perceiving at once the meaning of this, he was obliged to explain it to her, which had something of an awkward and ludicrous effect. Why, madame, it has a reference to me as being using big words, which require the mouth of a giant to pronounce them. Gargantua is the name of a giant in Rabelais. I said, but sir, there is another amongst them for you. He would not flatter Neptune for his trident, or Jove for his power to thunder. Johnson answered, there is nothing marked in that. No, sir, Gargantua is the best. Notwithstanding this ease and good humor, when I, a little while afterwards, repeated his sarcasm on Kenrick, it says see page 351. Maybe we'll do that later tonight, but not right now. When I repeated his sarcasm on Kenrick, which was received with applause, he asked, who said that? And on my suddenly answering Gargantua, he looked serious, which was a sufficient indication that he did not wish it to be kept up. When we went to the drawing room, there was a rich assemblage. Besides the company who had been at dinner, Mr. Garrick, I haven't heard from him in a while, Mr. Harris of Salisbury, Dr. Percy, Dr. Burney, Honorable Mrs. Cholmondeley, Miss Hannamore, and etc., and etc. After wandering about in a kind of pleasing distraction for some time, I got into a corner with Johnson, Garrick, and Harris. Garrick said to Harris, pray, sir, have you read Potter's Achilles? Harris answered, yes, and I think it pretty. Garrick said to Johnson, and what do you think you, sir, of it? Johnson answered, I thought when I read it of a verbiage. But upon Mr. Harris's recommendation, I will read a play. To Mr. Harris, he said, don't prescribe two. Mr. Harris suggested one. I do not remember which. Johnson answered, we must try its effect as an English poem. That is the way to judge of the merit of a translation. Translations are in general for people who cannot read the original. I mentioned the vulgar saying that Pope's Homer was not a good representation of the original. Johnson said, sir, it is the greatest work of the kind that has ever been produced. Ooh, got you there, Boswell. I said, the truth is, it is impossible perfectly to translate poetry. In a different language, it may be the same tune, but it has not the same tone. Homer plays it on a bassoon, Pope on a flaglet. I love it when Boswell's trying to show off to the others, but particularly Johnson. Harris said here, I think heroic poetry is best in blank verse, yet it appears that rhyme is essential to English poetry from our deficiency in metrical quantities. In my opinion, the chief excellence of our language is numerous prose. Johnson said, Sir William Temple was the first writer who gave cadence to English prose. Before his time, they were careless of arrangement and did not mind whether a sentence ended with an important word or an insignificant word, or with what part of a speech it was concluded. Mr. Langton, who now had joined us, commended Clarendon. Johnson said, "He is objected to for his parentheses, his involved clauses, and his want of harmony, but he is supported by his matter. It is indeed owing to a plethora of matter that his style is so faulty. Every substance," smiling to Mr. Harris, "has so many accidents. To be distinct, we must talk analytically. If we analyze language, we must speak of it grammatically. If we analyze argument, we must speak of it logically." And if that's not a Samuel Johnsonist, most Samuel Johnsonist of quotes, I don't know what is. That's like you could play a drinking game with that one. Garrick answered, "Of all the translations that ever were attempted, I think Elphinston's Martial the most extraordinary. He consulted me upon it, who am a little of an epigrammatist myself, you know. I told him freely, 'You don't seem to have that turn.' I asked him if he was serious, and finding he was, I advised him against publishing. Why, his translation is more difficult to understand than the original. I thought him a man of some talents, but he seems crazy in this." Johnson said, "Sir, you have done what I have no courage to do. But he did not ask my advice, and I did not force it upon him to make him angry with me." Garrick said, "But as a friend, sir," Johnson answered, "Why, such a friend as I am with him, no." Garrick answered, "But if you see a friend going to tumble over a precipice?" Johnson said, "That is an extravagant case, sir. You are sure a friend will thank you for hindering him from tumbling over a precipice. But in the other case, I should hurt his vanity and do him no good. He would not take my advice. His brother-in-law, Strahan, sent him a subscription of £50 and said he would send him 50 more if he would not publish." Garrick said, "What? Is Strahan a good judge of an epigram? Is not he rather an obtuse man, eh?" Johnson said, "Why, sir, he may not be a judge of an epigram, but you see he is a judge of what is not an epigram." I said, "It is easy for you, Mr. Garrick, to talk of an author as you talk to Elphinston, you who have been so long the manager of a theater, rejecting the plays of poor authors. You are an old judge who have often pronounced sentence of death. You are a practiced surgeon who have often amputated limbs, and though this may have been for the good of your patients, they cannot like you. Those who have undergone a dreadful operation are not very fond of seeing the operator again." Now, I wonder if Boswell, in post-production, paints his words a little bit more than they actually were. And I also wonder if all these other people know that Boswell's writing all this down and they're, have their A game going. Anyway, Garrick answered to this, "Yes, I know enough of that. That was a reverend gentleman, Mr. Hawkins, who wrote a tragedy, The Siege of Something, which I refused." Footnote here from Boswell. It was called The Siege of Aleppo. Mr. Hawkins, the author of it, was formerly professor of poetry at Oxford. It is printed in his miscellanies 3 volumes octavo. Harris said, "So the siege was raised." Johnson said, "Aye, he came to me and complained, and told me that Garrick said his play was wrong in the concoction. Now, what is the concoction of a play?" Here Garrick started and twisted himself and seemed sorely vexed, for Johnson told me he believed the story was true. Garrick said, I said first concoction." Johnson, smiling, said, "Well, he left out first. And Rich, he said, refused him in false English. He could show it under his hand." Garrick said, "He wrote to me in a violent wrath for having refused his play. Sir, this is growing a very serious and terrible affair. I am resolved to publish my play. I will appeal to the world, and how will your judgment appear?" I answered, this is still Garrick speaking, "Sir, notwithstanding all the seriousness and all the terrors, I have no objection to your publishing your play. And as you live at a great distance, Devonshire, I believe, If you will send it to me, I will convey it to the press. I never heard more of it. Ha ha ha! Well, that was a good little... I enjoyed that. Bunch of pompous wits there. They were good. On Friday, April 10th, I found Johnson at home in the morning. We resumed the conversation of yesterday. He put me in mind of some of it which had escaped my memory, and enabled me to record it more perfectly than I otherwise could have. Aha, I've done. See, now this is where... So he wrote it down the day before, and now he's adding the little flourishes in there. He was much pleased with my paying so great attention to his recommendation in 1763, the period when our acquaintance began, that I should keep a journal. And I could perceive he was secretly pleased to find so much of the fruit of his mind preserved. And as he had been used to imagine and said that he always labored when he said a good thing, it delighted him of a review to find that his conversation teemed with point and imagery. I said to him, "You were yesterday, sir, in a remarkably good humor, but there was nothing to offend you, nothing to produce irritation or violence. There was no bold offender. There was not one capital conviction. It was a maiden assize. You had on your white gloves." He found fault with our friend Langton for having been too silent. "Sir," said I, "you will recollect that he was properly took up Sir Joshua for being glad that Charles Fox had praised Goldsmith's Traveller, and you joined him." Johnson said, "Yes, sir, I knocked Fox on the head without ceremony. Reynolds is too much under Fox and Burke at present. He is under the Fox star in the Irish constellation. He is always under some planet." I said, "There is no Fox star." Johnson said, "But there is a dog star." I said, "They say indeed a fox and a dog are the same animal." Oh, these guys are too cute together. I reminded him of a gentleman, says here Langton, who they were literally just talking about, right? Weren't they? Yeah. Who Mrs. Cholmondeley said was first talkative from affection and then silent from the same cause. That he first thought, "I shall be celebrated as the liveliest man in every company," and then all at once, "Oh, it is much more respectable to be grave and look wise." He has revered the Pythagorean disciple by being first talkative and then silent. I think this is Johnson talking. He reverses the course of nature too. He was first the gay butterfly and then the creeping worm. Johnson laughed loud and long at this expansion and illustration of what he himself had told me. Or I don't know who's speaking there. Well, at first it's Boswell, but then the quote mark ends at wise, and then the second part about Pythagorean discipline seems to be Johnson because it's a different quote. But maybe it's both Boswell, I don't know. We dined together with Mr. Scott, now Sir William Scott, His Majesty's Advocate General, at his chambers in the Temple. Nobody else there. The company being small, Johnson was not in such spirits as he had been the preceding day, and for a considerable time little was said. At last he burst forth, "Subordination is sadly broken down in this age. No man now has the same authority which his father had, except a gaoler," which I guess is jailer, I've learned. Except a jailer. "No master has it over his servants. It is diminished in our colleges. Nay, it is in our grammar schools. Nay, in our grammar schools as well." I said, "What is the cause of this, sir?" Johnson said, "Why, the coming in of the Scotch," laughing sarcastically. I said, "That is to say, things have been turned topsy-turvy. But your serious cause?" Johnson said, "Why, sir, there are many causes, the chief of which is, I think, the great increase of money. No man now depends upon the lord of a manor when he can send to another country and fetch provisions. The shoeblack at the gentry of my court does not depend on me. I can deprive him but of a penny a day, which he hopes somebody else will bring him, and that penny I must carry to another shoeblack, so the trade suffers nothing. I have explained in my journey to the Hebrides how gold and silver destroy feudal subordination. But besides, there is a general relaxation of reverence. No son now depends upon his father as at former times. Paternity used to be considered as useful of itself a great thing, which had a right to many claims. That is, in general, reduced to very small bounds. My hope is that as anarchy produces tyranny, this extreme relaxation will produce frenio strictio, a tight rein. And we'll leave it at that. And I've got to remember now, I've got to look up down the other page. See page 351 when Boswell was at somewhere, Kerrick, I think, or something like that. Anyway, yeah, Kenrick. I'll look that up on my own leisure now. Well, until next time, bye from Boswell.